Okay, our presenter tonight is Cheryl Wilcox, and she's a longtime member of the Riverside Astronomical Society, where she currently serves as chief observer. Cheryl taught middle school science in Ukiah, California for 33 years. Bless you for that. Okay. Since retiring, Cheryl's main focus has been on the Milky Way photography. She has enjoyed the opportunity that retirement has provided to learn about nightscape photography and getting out for some star therapy. In addition to night photography, Cheryl is an astrophotographer, capturing images of nebula and galaxies through telescopes. He also dabbles with creating Milky Way time-lapse videos. Without further ado, Cheryl will come.
Right, thank you. All right. Thank you much for the invitation to come talk tonight. This is something I've very much enjoyed since retiring back in 2021. And it's kind of funny when I walked in. I know a couple of people here because they're also in my astronomy club, but I walked in and I was like, that's not Linda DeBlanc, is it? Yeah, because Linda actually taught drama during first period at my school site where I've been for 30-something years. So it was really neat to see her. So, all right, so let's get right on into it. So, I've been, like we said here, a long-term member of the Riverside Astronomical Society, worn a lot of hats there. But photography-wise, I remember, probably since I was like 8 years old, back in the day of the Kodak Instamatic 126, shooting pictures of my Breyer horses and the grass when I lived in New York, and cats and dogs and things like that, to the 110 cameras, to I even had a Kodak disc camera when I was high school. But I really got serious about photography and took a certificate course through Riverside Community College back in the early, let's say it was like 93 through 96. And so I was using a Nikon F2. So I got really interested in a more professional level camera, and I've been using, actually I'm a Nikon person ever since starting that aspect. And I've been doing nightscape photography since about 2022. So let's talk first about the gear that you're going to need. So obviously it's photography, so you're going to need a camera. And this day and age, a modern DSLR or mirrorless is helpful. Thank you. All right, so being a Nikon person, this is for an example of the D7500. It's a crop sensor, but has a pretty good low light ratio for working with Milky Way. The mirrorless Z series, the Z6II, the Z6III, the Z7II, the Z8 are all really nice cameras for photography, but you don't need to go out and buy a brand new camera for Milky Way photography. So we'll get into that as well. Lenses, though, like Bruce's workshop is reading the blurb on that, you want to have a wide angle lens. So kind of a budget lens is a Rokinon or Samyang, depending on what part of the world you're buying it from, but their 14mm f2.8 is not terribly expensive and does a reasonably nice job. On my D7500, I really like the Hina 11 to 16mm f2.8. And on my Z camera, my gold standard, I absolutely love the 20mm lens, just an awesome piece of glass. But you don't always need a super expensive lens either. You are going to need something to mount your camera and lens on, so you can have a sturdy and cheap camera tripod, but it's going to be heavy because you're having aluminum legs, so it's going to be a little heavy to tote around. You can go sturdy and light, but that's going to up the price. So because we're talking about carbon fiber there, but what you don't want to do is cheap and light because it's going to fall apart with you. It's not going to last more than a season or so. And if there's any wind, your camera's going to be shaking around. So you want to find that happy medium that you have something that's pretty sturdy. Well, you need to attach a camera to said tripod. So you might use some sort of geared head or a ball head to attach. I typically use the ball head, but several of my fellow Milky Way photographers really like the geared head. And I'm kind of thinking maybe that's something I'd like to try sometime, somewhere along the way. You want some sort of remote shutter because you don't want to be touching your camera during your exposures. So something like the D7500 just has the little electronic eye up front. You just can use the little clicker there, like this one here from Amazon. But you can also hook in a wired little remote and just to simply plunge and to tell your camera, okay, take a picture. Or you can be a little bit more advanced and get an intervalometer where you can program, I want to take this many photos, this many for the shutter speed. My interval between my photos is this long. So a lot of options for a remote shutter, but you're going to want a remote shutter so you don't have to touch your shutter button by itself. Some accessories, you want to basically have a remote, a extra battery just in case. Make sure you do remember to charge it. I forgot to put on here, but having an extra memory card is also a good idea. If you're going to be in a situation where it's cold outside, you might get some condensation on your lens. Having a heat strap, a dew strap is helpful. You can use just a little brick camera power supply for that. And a red flashlight. And I know some of you might be joining groups for the event coming up. Just a couple notes on the flashlight. If it's a red flashlight, you want to make sure it is a dim red flashlight. It's got enough layers of red so that it's not still really, really bright. You don't need a lot of light when you're out there in the fields. If you're uncomfortable about walking on uneven ground, yes.
Before you get too far, what's the strap on the camera?
Okay, so that is a heat strap,
Heat
basically.
strap.
Yeah, so it's just gonna keep your wet lens warm so you don't get condensation.
And it's powered by a battery? Or?
Yeah, I just basically like you use to set for your cell phone if you're gonna be remote somewhere and you want to have extra power. Just a little power bank works really well for that.
Okay.
I've only had to use it a couple of times during the year when there's just enough moisture in the air and it's cold enough that I worry about that. If you're going to be shooting like near the ocean, it might be something to good keep in your backpack just in case.
And where did you get that kind of thing?
I actually got mine just off of Amazon.
Yeah.
Some of the telescope companies or camera companies like B&H Photo or Adorama also sell items like
And
this.
it's just called heat strap.
Yeah, just a heat strap or dew strap. Yeah.
Would that be something you would use if you were off to Alaska and it's in and out of hot and cold?
I would say it's probably would be a really good idea to have just in case.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, never saw.
So, and they come in different lengths and sizes, depending on how big your system is, but most that you'll find in Amazon work fine. The only thing you need to worry about on that is just what the connector is. There are some brands of the dew straps that are proprietary. I never can say that right. So they plug into a very dedicated power supply and not just the USB. So you just want to make sure, look at the plug-in, make sure it's a USB so you can plug it into any power. So for a headlamp, I was mentioning, if you are not feeling steady walking distances over unsteady areas, I personally like to have a white headlamp of some sort to light my way. But once I'm at my camera, you want red light. You want to make sure that if you're talking to other people, you have a headlamp that tilts down so you're not staring bright light, red light into their face. So just one of those etiquette things. And you also, since you're going to be going out in a group, what you want to do is make sure if you need to turn your light on for any reason, ask people if anybody's got their shutter open. Because if they're in the middle of a 2 or 3 minute foreground exposure and you flip your light on, you might get little dagger eyes at you. So you want to make sure, be cognizant of what others are doing as well. You can take the red out, but it's kind of a pain, and that red cap will be everywhere, even if the light's only on for a short while. And extra batteries for your headlamp as well. So my first Milky Way photo with real purpose. I had taken the Milky Way before. We'd be somewhere doing telescope stuff, and I'd point the camera up and take a picture, you know, on a tripod. But I never connected it to the ground until this was at the 2019 Grand Canyon Star Party at the South Rim. And even though I don't have a whole lot of foreground in there, I have a photo later where I do, but there were cars. Okay, so I kept this one cropped kind of tight, but I was so excited when all of a sudden across my LCD screen, this appeared. And I didn't have a fancy camera. I had this guy. This was a used D3400 that I actually purchased for the 2017 eclipse. It had the kit lens, which was an 18 to 55 millimeter. I had a very wobbly tripod. It just happened to be what we had with us at the time. And I'd asked my husband, because we were both, you know, we're astronomers, so we've helped out at the event. And I asked, I said, you know, could we do one more night? And you do helping out with the telescopes. And I'm going to go off to the side and try Milky Way photography. So a couple of YouTube videos to watch. Well, how do you focus really well? And that night I went out and got this picture. So I was very excited. So you don't need expensive gear is my point. Often the camera you have is the best one to get started. All right, so you've got some gear. Where are you going to look? Well, you want to know where the Milky Way core, when they say Milky Way season, we're really talking about the Milky Way core, the brightest part of the Milky Way, where that will be. So springtime, it's going to be in your southeast sky. In your summer months, it'll be to the south. And in the fall is more to the southwest, which is here in Southern California, probably the most awful time, just because there's so much light pollution, because we're looking more towards LA and such. But you can still end up getting some nice images no matter what time of year you're photographing. So you got to know where the Milky Way core is going to be. So this picture just basically shows you on the left, when it's in the southeast sky, you're going to be getting up kind of early. The Milky Way is going to be rising before sunrise. So it's a late night, early morning kind of situation. By summer, the Milky Way is more rising, more into 10, 11, early summer. And by the end of the summertime, as soon as it's fully dark, the Milky Way is there and you can get started right away. So the Milky Way will move through the sky in that path from springtime to October. So right now we're on the far kind of right side of the slide there, where the Milky Way is more vertical when it's dark. All right, 2 constellations will help you find the Milky Way. We have Scorpius here, and we have Sagittarius, the teapot. And if you notice in the teapot, the steam that's kind of looking like it's rising out of the teapot, that's the Milky Way core. So it's kind of a look. The other thing you can look is right here. If you can see my mouse there, these are the stinger stars of Scorpius. If you can see the stinger stars, the Milky Way core is up. The other thing you might want to look for is if you're looking kind of south, southeast, and it's kind of early in the season, you're looking for a kind of a reddish orange star. If that's kind of near the horizon, you have about an hour to wait for the core to come up. So it's kind of a nice indicator of getting your gear ready. Okay, and I'm looking the right direction. I can start seeing the head stars here of Scorpius. Then I start seeing Antares, which is the heart of the scorpion. And so that star's bright. It's very undeniable because of its color. He's like, yeah, I'm looking at the southish. That's it. So you know, an hour later, the Milky Way core will be up and you will be in business. So you want to do some planning. You want to begin with the end in mind. So how are you going to edit this? Is it going to be a silhouette image? Is it an image you can capture with a single frame? Is it something that's going to go wide or something that's going to go tall? So I'm going to need extra images. Do I need to take a foreground image separately and blend that with my Milky Way images? Do I want to stack the images? Do I have a star tracker to track the images? So you kind of have to think of, what do I want to get out of what I'm going to do? And then start there, work backwards and think, okay, I need this many pictures. I'm going to do from here to here and get that all planned out. Planning also involves knowing where you're gonna take your photos. So if you weren't going on a group trip like you're gonna be doing on September 19th, you wanna plan where you're gonna go. And if it's an area you have not been in before, I recommend scouting during the daytime, looking for hazards and things along the way. You can't over plan, but if you fail to plan, you're gonna plan to fail. So make sure you really think out what you're gonna do before you get there. So when do you shoot the Milky Way? Well, we wanna know what the Milky Way rise and set times are. Those are gonna be important. We wanna know what the moon phase is, and if the moon is gonna be up, what is the rise and set time, and is that gonna be a problem for me? We wanna know when it's gonna be dark. So when is the start and end of astronomical twilight? And weather, is it gonna be too windy? Is it gonna be too cloudy? Is it gonna be raining? That sucks. So you wanna know all these things prior to going out. So you can use a few apps. Stellarium has a free version of that. It helps you look at where the Milky Way is. You can put in the time and date, where you're gonna observe from, and watch and go through, and the Milky Way will come up and you can make note of the time. The two apps I use basically are called Photo Pills, which is a paid app. It tells you a lot of information and it helps with planning as well. And another one's called Planet Pro, which has various, depending on what you want out of it, it has different subscription aspects to it, where Photo Pills, I think, is about $20 as a one-time fee. But these two apps will help you with planning. Photo Pills is really nice when you're on a site and you're saying, okay, I know I'm on the right day and everything, and I want to see where the Milky Way will be to help with my composition. You can go into AR mode and have your phone up and see about where you want to stand, because it'll show the Milky Way and your foreground. It's very helpful. Planet Pro I use even before I leave home. And I can say, okay, I think I want to be around here in this location, and it'll show you an AR view of what the Milky Way is going to look like from that point of view. So nice tools, and they all will help you know when is the Milky Way coming up and when is it setting, so that you're on site at the right time. And is it even going to be up? Then we want to look at the moon. The general times you want to be out photographing is going to be 3 days plus or minus of a new moon. That's the optimum time for Milky Way photography. There's other times you can get Milky Way as well, depending on the moon phase, but you really want to get into what are my moon rise and moon set times. If I have a crescent moon, no big deal. That might actually be helpful when I'm going to do a foreground of my set area that I picked to photograph from. So the image that you see here on the way back from the total solar eclipse last year in April, we decided to come back we were in Arkansas, of all places, where we ended up. And my husband said, hey, I got a crazy idea. Like, uh-oh. And he said, how about we swing by Devil's Tower on the way back? I'm like, yes, it works. So I looked at the moon phase. First thing I wanted to know was like, you know what? It's not real big. We're about 6 days after new moon. So we're getting towards first quarter. It's doable. The moon's going to set. I can do this. So we ended up going out to Devil's Tower. I had seen this location from a fellow photographer's image earlier in the year, and thought, I want to go there. So the moon was still up, but it was low on the horizon, and it lit my foreground just enough, and I was really happy with that. And you can see in the image, the Milky Way itself is laying down right over here. So about an hour and a half later, it had moved to this location, which is where I wanted the richer, darker parts, brighter parts, I should say, of the Milky Way. Problem was I got clouds coming in here, so I would have liked the arch to be a little bit over the top, but sometimes you got to get what you get, and we were there as a one-time thing, so I was really happy about what I got. And knowing that moonrise and moon set time, I was able to illuminate my foreground for once with the moon, and I think it turned out nice, and you'll see a picture of that later, the final product. But you want to avoid full moon, too bright, it's gonna wash out your Milky Way, and 3 days before that, 3 days after it are definitely not good times to try to do Milky Way photography. All right, when is it dark? So when you have your sunrise or sunset, we go through a series of twilights. We go through civil twilight, nautical, and astronomical twilight's the one that we Milky Way photographers want to key in on, because when astronomical twilight ends in the evening, it's as dark as it's going to get. So you want to be photographing after that period of time. If it's in the morning, you want to know when astronomical twilight is going to begin, because we're starting to have the influence of the sun at that point into the sky, and your Milky Way is not going to be as bright. It's going to start getting washed out. So knowing when astronomical twilight is going to be important. And again, the apps that I shared with you, Stellarium will help with that. It'll with Photo Kills and Planet Pro, and you can actually Google from Joshua Tree, when does astronomical twilight end on the 19th of September? And you'll find out, oh, 8:09 p.m. So give you an idea. This was in Maine in September a couple of years back, and I needed to start photographing right away when I got there, because my composition I wanted the Milky Way, but I didn't want it to get over into the tree here. But I also had a foreground in mind that I wanted. So I was kind of stuck with what I needed. So I started shooting, but this is 19 minutes before it's dark. And if you notice on the image, the sky is still rather blue. The sky is not blue, but that's due to scattering of sunlight. So a couple minutes later, took another picture. Now my sky is starting to get a little bit more purple. I'm starting to lose a little bit of the blues. I'm still in astronomical twilight at this point, but I'm happy enough it's dark, because if I wait too much longer, my Milky Way is going to move over into those trees. Yes.
How long are your images?
I think that's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, because I know that's one of the
Sorry.
big questions. No worries. No, it's good. So I think I got that actually in the slide or two. So I'll share that with you in a sec. So sky's getting darker. You want to be fully into astronomical twilight for the best, brightest for the Milky Way. Another thing you want to consider is the Bortle scale. It's just simply a numerical scale to tell you how bright your sky is. Here in Redlands, and I live in Riverside, we're in the Bortle 6 to 7 range, which over here is kind of bright. It's not great. Milky Way is going to be very hard to do from those locations. You really, if you can, the Bortle 1 or 2 sky is great, but Death Valley is going to be your closest, and that's kind of a long trip. So if you have a plan to go out to Death Valley, just do it, and at a time where it's, not melt your face off hot. But you can also go to a Bortle 3 or 4 sky. So Joshua Tree, there's 2 portions of Joshua Tree, the upper part and the lower Pinto Basin part. The upper part's interesting because you have all the interesting Joshua trees. There's those wonderful rock formations. That's where you're going to be on the 19th. That's a Bortle 4. Okay, it's not bad. That's kind of my limit where I'd like to shoot. You're going to get a pretty decent image from there. Bortle 3 is going to be a little bit darker of a sky. That's going to be in the Pinto Basin area. If you take a right by Skull Rock and head down towards the Cottonwood Springs entrance, that portion of the park, if you're familiar with Joshua Tree at all, that's a Bortle 3. So your Milky Way will look a little bit better, a little bit more detail in that part of the park. The bad thing is I have Cholla cactus, I have some Ocotillo, but I don't have the really good rock formations there. So, you shoot where you have the availability, and that's where in your schedule it falls. Okay, that's where I'm shooting. But 3 would be better. 5 and above, we went out to the Lost Dutchman. I think State Park, that's what I'm looking for. That was back in April this past year. Bortle 5, but I really liked the work that I got there. So sometimes, even though the sky's gonna be a little bit bright, you can make it work for you. Shooting into an area that maybe I'm in a 5, but I'm pointing towards a 3 or 4. sky's darker over there, so if it works, you'll have a better Milky Way image. So an example of light pollution here from a couple years ago. Friend wanted to get mud cracks. And so she had scouted out this area on the Clark dry lake bed out in Borrego Springs. And she thought, okay, this is gonna work. So several of us went. We're standing there, we're looking, it's like, okay, it's time. It's astronomical twilight. It's dark. It should be fine. And I see Antares, it's up. And I don't see anything. And we were just very, very frustrated. We did have a little cloud there, as you see in the image down below. But we were here on the dry lake bed and we're photographing to the southeast. So you've got El Centro and Mexicali burning up the sky. I mean, this huge light dome here. We couldn't even see the Milky Way until a good hour, hour and a half after it had risen because of that terrible light pollution. So we were doing it all wrong. We're in the Bortle 3 and we're pointed towards, Bortle 7, Bortle 8 or so. So always try to point your camera, if possible, if it lines up with the Milky Way, pointing into a better Bortle. The lower the number, the better. Here's another example. This was in a Bortle 1 sky at the Golden State Star Party near Aden up in Northern California-ish. There's a city that's there is a Bortle 5, but it's very small. So if you look at my light flow here, there's not much. The Milky Way is pretty consistent, nice, all the way down to the horizon. So knowing what your Bortle's light pollution aspect is going to be helpful for you if you're planning your own outings. Well, weather can be your nemesis. Like it was stated, I'm an astrophotographer as well, and I was really looking forward to going out to our astronomy club's property in Landers last new moon photograph. We looked at Friday, clouds. Looked at Saturday, clouds. Well, what if we go Sunday? Clouds. So sometimes it's good to have an app that will help you. Me personally, the first thing I'll look at, I have the Weather Channel premium, so I can do every hour and get an idea of what my temperature is going to be, what's my wind going to be, what is my cloud cover going to be. Or more in depth, you can use Clear Outside, which is online as well as an app, and it'll break it down what your cloud cover is, the wind speeds and such. Another app called Good to Stargaze, and all these are on iOS as well as Android. I'm an Android gal myself. These will break it down by hour. And again, what your cloud cover generally in your area is expected to be. Windy does the same thing. It's not just wind. There are overlayers for your other weather aspects, including your clouds. So you need to know, is it going to be cloudy? How much clouds am I willing to work with? Because some actually add to your image. But if you can't see the Milky Way core, then I get kind of frustrated. So the settings part. Shutter speed really depends on your camera, your gear. So you want to try maybe anywhere from 10 seconds to about 30. Take a look at your image for star trailing. You want your stars to be pinpoints. If they're looking like kind of longer blobs, you need to cut back on your shutter speed a bit. So it takes a little bit of practice with imaging just to see what's going to work for your gear. For mine, my D7500, 13 seconds. Almost every situation, 13 seconds. It's going to be good. My Z62, 10 seconds. Is kind of my optimum. So for my gear, that works pretty well. Your aperture, you want to have your lens wide open for starters. So if you have a lens that's f2.8, great. If you notice your stars aren't round, particularly in the corners, you can always maybe stop it down a little bit. But if your lens is only at 2.8, is the fastest it'll go, you might want to just leave it there as well, because then otherwise you're down at like a 4. Now you're limiting how much light is hitting your sensor, and it's going to be a little tougher to get a good image. So it's kind of you have to tweak your settings to see what works for your gear. Your ISO is going to depend on your location. Typically 3200 to 6400, although occasionally it might be higher. I was going through on a recent trip, and I usually use 6400, 10 seconds. I'm at, my lens will go to f1.8. I usually knock it down to a 2.2 or 2.8. And I'm taking my pictures and they're dark. And so I had to kick up, my shutter speed. I couldn't do anymore because my stars are gonna trail. I don't want my lens too far open for that. So it was like, I can mess with that a little bit, and I ended up shooting with 8,000. So sometimes you're gonna be at a little higher. But generally speaking, 3,200 to 6,400 is kind of that sweet spot for Milky Way photography. White balance, depends on your camera. My main one I shoot with is, what's called Astro Modified. So my white balance would not be this, but for a regular camera, about 4,000 to 4,500 will give you nice natural colors for your sky. So some basic settings there. We'll get into those a little bit more in a bit. If you have a lens that has a manual setting to it, set it to manual. Camera needs to be in manual as well. You want to make sure your settings for what you're shooting is in RAW. You could do RAW and JPEG, but if you're going to be processing your images, you're not going to need the JPEGs. You just want the RAW files. So save some space on your SD card. I started out shooting RAW and JPEG. I never used the JPEG, so I just shoot in RAW now. You want to turn off your vibration reduction or image stabilization because you're on a tripod anyway. So that's not going to be an issue. So you can turn that setting off. And you want to turn off the long exposure noise reduction. What happens there if you have it on is, let's say you're doing a foreground exposure and you're doing 6 minutes. Okay. Your camera is now going to do a dark frame for 6 minutes to subtract the amp flow of your sensor, your hot pixels and such. So you're now 12 minutes and you got one image. So generally speaking, I leave that off. And if I want to take a dark frame to subtract and what's called a calibration frame and subtract my hot pixels and what have you, I'll do dark frames at the end, and there's software that you can, use to help with that. Typically, I don't do dark frames. I just will go in and I'll take out my hot pixels as I go. You also want to turn down your LCD screen. When it's dark, it's going to be bright in your face, in your neighbor's faces if you're photographing with someone else. So turn that down. But when you do that, you're going to need to remember one thing. The LCD screen lies. Okay, it's just a JPEG representation. So you really need to trust the histogram. So if you can get to the histogram when you're looking at the playback of your images, that's going to be more helpful. So I got a couple of examples here. If you're doing a Milky Way shot, you want to have majority of your sky data trailing off around the middle of your histogram, like the yellow arrows are showing here. That first peak over by your blacks, your darks, that's the foreground. Okay, so this is the foreground. Here's your foreground. The second peak, there's your Milky Way data, your sky data. So when this trails off, Dan gets pretty low to your x-axis. If it's about in the middle, that's a good exposure. So using that LCD screen isn't always helpful. You can use the histogram. The histogram doesn't lie. Your LCD screen does. So, all right. Types of Milky Way photos. So again, that deals with the planning aspect. Are you going to do a single? Are you going to do a panorama? Are you going to blend? Are you going to stack, track, or are you going to do a composite? So I wanted to share each of those with you quickly here. This is a single I took. I was using a new lens to me. I was using the Sigma 28 1.4 and checking it out for the first time. And I was just interested, let's get a couple images. So I exposed this and then edited it just for the sky. And mostly the pinnacles are silhouette. That can make an interesting shot, especially you got those cool pinnacles and such. So you could do that and be happy with just dealing with the sky and leaving out everything else in silhouette. Well, another thing you could do is if your camera has a nice latitude and you can pull areas out of your dark area in your image, you could do what's called a double edit of your single. So this is an example that I did from Lake Mammy up in Mammoth Lakes from a couple of years ago. It's a single frame. I went ahead in Lightroom Classic and I did the select sky mask. I moved the sliders around so you have various aspects you can choose from the exposure, contrast, your highlights, your shadows, your whites and your blacks. So I'm playing around with my sliders there and I get it to where I want it. And I do color balance on that, which you can do, and I can talk to you about that as well a bit. But I did my sky, and then I went to my mask. I right-clicked on it and told it to duplicate and invert it. Now I was masking for my foreground, and I brought up that exposure to see more detail there. So if your camera can handle seeing more in what's in the darks and your shadows, this is a neat technique you can do. The only issue you get, and I did it on purpose in this image here, is you notice along the horizon, I've got a lot of white. You have to be a little careful if you push your data too far, you're going to get that kind of white edge in your image because of the way the mask overlaps. So you can try to mess with that a little bit with a brush in Lightroom. But this one I didn't. I just simply duplicated and inverted the mask to mess with it a little bit. What's really kind of cool now in Lightroom, or if you're in Photoshop and using the Camera Raw filter, you, in addition to select the sky, they now have where you can select the landscape and it'll bring up options based on your image. If it notices there's mountains, there's architecture, there are wooden structures, there's natural dirt, there's water, if I didn't say it already, there is vegetation. You can select for all those different masking options, and then you can play with those sliders and bring up or bring down various things in your image. So there's a lot of things you can do just simply with Lightroom. All right, so you want to take a panorama, something wide or tall. You're going to take several frames. I typically like to overlap my frames 30 to 50%, and I typically do more like 50 to do a horizontal panorama. So shot, 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 done in portrait mode. In this case, the Milky Way itself might be the star of your photo, or maybe you're in a cool location like what I'm going to share here, that the Milky Way was nice, but the foreground was what I was there for. So I've took a series of images. This is in Oregon at Secret Beach. You have to do a climb down and then you're on an incline. It was not the most comfortable place to shoot, but when I saw a picture from here, it's like, I need to go there. So I got to go there in June. So I took those images. I didn't have my laptop with me. I had my tablet though. I found an app that would stitch those images together, and it did that for me. And I used Lightroom just a little bit with my sliders. I'm like, oh, this is the reason why. So it's what I wanted here. The Milky Way hugging the curve of the mountains looked really nice. Unfortunately, this was during third quarter moon. So our moon was going to be coming up and influencing things. That's about as far as I could get it off the hillside there before the moon would start brightening my sky. But I wanted to feature a nice panorama with the Milky Way as kind of a secondary element there. And then with Photoshop, I decided I didn't want it quite as wide. So this is what I ended up with my final edit there. And this again, these are just single images. This is not a separate foreground. This is sky and foreground together, same image, just stitched together and edited with Lightroom. And then, well, you might want to do one that features the Milky Way. So here's where I took 13 individual frames. This was in the Panamint Valley, so Death Valley's on the other side of us. So I'm looking towards Death Valley in end of March, early April. And again, overlapping 30 to 50%. And that's what I ended up editing to bring out. We were at the Eastern Sierra University had this pop-up star camp thing. So you've got these little shift pod neat things. They gave you a couple of cots and you just bring your own bedding. It was a neat situation, but I had to get up at 3 a.m. to photograph that. So that is my first panorama that I ever did. So I was really excited about that. All right. Yes.
I was wondering on that, where you've got so many pictures going across, do you have issues because the stars are moving?
Yeah,
How do you get everything?
Yeah,
to stay in one spot?
basically in a panorama, you want to not let a lot of time elapse between one photo to the next. So you need to know where you're going to start and get the image, get the image, and get the image. On the one I just shared there, actually, those were 4 images that I stacked and then took that single picture, did that 13 more times with the other sets, and then used a program called PT GUI to stitch them together. I had actually used Lightroom to stitch originally, and I got these dark bands, and it was partly because my frames had some vignetting, and I didn't know at that point how you could turn the vignetting off in the images. And I'd heard about PT GUI, so I decided to go ahead and get that. And actually I always use that now when I do my panoramas, but you can put the panorama together in Lightroom as well. So those panoramas were done you're in portrait mode. Okay, a vertical panorama, you're going to start in landscape mode and you're building vertically to create your image. So here I was at Sunset Point and I was not willing to climb into the canyon, but we found this nice little slot here that I was comfortable with. There was a fire in the area, so we had a little bit of smoke off to the edge here, to the kind of southeast, but we were able to do the Milky Way. So my first image was here more with horizon, and then my second image, I went up a little higher. And I took these images together to create 3 frames high, basically. And that was my final image there at Sunset Point from the end of June this past year. And this one I wanted a little bit more moody because of the fire in the area. So it's all how you envision it, how you do your edits. It's because this is art. So this is my art in this. I absolutely love this genre of photography. So this was 3 images taken in landscape mode, but it creates a vertical, more portrait mode look to it.
Will you spell out the PT GUI?
Yeah, it's PT and then GUI.
Ah,
Yeah,
I had
PT
Dewey.
GUI, which is that's such a weird name for it. I know. So
you're right.
PT GUI, yeah. And they have, I think, they have a couple different levels of, it's a paid program, there's different levels of it. But you can only start with Lightroom, and if this is something that you decide you're gonna be doing a lot, then I'd recommend considering it, but I wouldn't recommend, starting out grabbing PT GUI. Get your feet wet, see if it's something you really enjoy doing. And this image just wanted to share. Panoramas of the Milky Way don't have to be during Milky Way course season. This is in February. This is the constellation of Orion here. I was testing out a new setup for my panorama rig on my tripod. So this was just at our astronomy club set on one of the pads, and I took a 2-row panorama. So you can do panoramas anytime the Milky Way is always up, just the core is typically up early February to about October beginning or so. All right, another type of photo you might want to do is consider a blend. This involves 2 images. One's going to be for the sky, at least, and one for the foreground, but you're going to need Photoshop to blend these 2 together, or something like, you could do this maybe in GIMP, anything that allows you to do layers and masking. So you want to take a longer exposure for your foreground and a proper exposure for the sky. So this was at Boot Arch in the Alabama Hills, which I know Bruce has been there recently, right? So this is what I blended those 2 images together and did edits for my foreground, edits for the sky, and it just so happened Boot Arch behind us is a dirt road, and up to the other side there's a rise. And as I was doing my foreground, a car started coming down that rise, light from their headlights swept across. When I looked at my foreground, I'm like, I kind of like that. So got a little bit of unnatural light there because I typically will not light my foregrounds. But I thought that actually turned out kind of cool. So that's a blend, a foreground image shot to make sure your foreground is nice and tight and in focus, and then a sky image and you blend them in Photoshop. Okay, you can do what's called a blue hour blend. So that's when you're after sunset, you're past the golden hour, which is such a pretty time to get things going on with landscape photography. You're letting less into the sun be in the sky at this point, but you're still getting some nice illumination on your subject. There's still some shadows involved. So this was at El Capitan State Beach last August. We waited around, did a blue hour foreground. And then we had to wait till astronomical twilight. And I did 2 frames for my sky after astronomical twilight. Then I used PT viewing and I stacked those 2 images together. And then I created my final image, taking the sky and the foreground and blending them. And this is where you'll take a mask and remove the sky from the foreground and line it up with your Milky Way. And you get a blue hour blend. They're pretty, you get more detail, I think, in your foreground, but then there's that waiting around time to be able to get your Milky Way. Right now, blue hour foregrounds are really kind of nice because you can go out and shoot, get your blue hour foreground, and as soon as it's dark, Milky Way's there. In the springtime, that's a little harder because you have to wait either until the sun starts coming up and you've done your Milky Way first, or I like it better like we did here in August of last year, get your foreground taken and then just a short wait before it gets dark. So then you can stack images. So in this case, I was at Arch Window in North Rim of Grand Canyon. I took 3 exposures, one at the foreground, one for these cool rocks that were in front of me, and then one kind of mid foreground. And then I let Photoshop blend those and pick the sharper areas of each image and compile that into a single image. And then I took, typically I'll do 10 to 15 exposures. So I did 12 here of my sky. It's kind of diminishing returns. After about 15, you're not going to see much improvement in your sky, but you're going to stack images to help reduce noise and bring out more detail. So I took those, I compiled them in a program called Sequitur. There's another one, if you're a Mac person, called Starry Landscape Stacker. That one has a small fee to it, where Sequitur is free. But what's nice is you sometimes will have those plane trails going through your images. It will remove those. The bad thing is if you have a cool meteor going through your frame too, you have to be careful on that. If you, at least in Sequitur, I can pick that frame to use as my base image and it'll leave it in it. Or you can go in and do a little masking and find that image and just paint over the top of it to bring it back up. So just a heads up, if you have a cool meteor, you have to be careful when you're stacking. So I'm gonna just mention here, the one on the left is stacked. So I've helped with stacking those images, the random noise in my camera, it evens those all out. It helps enhance detail in areas where on the right, it's unstacked. So I can see here, I don't have a lot of fuzzy noise in this part of what's called the Dark Horse Nebula. If you're not familiar with it, by the core area here, we have a dark nebula. So this is his hind leg, his body, his front leg, and up to his head here. So it looks like a horse, so they call it the dark horse. This part of the dark horse over here, when I look at this on a monitor, it's very noisy. So by stacking those images, I was able to reduce some just random noise that you get in any photograph, even that out, and then it also enhances a little detail, tends to tighten up your stars a little bit, and any detail you see in the nebula part. Yes.
Go.
The 610 has a, not the Z62
Yes.
has a stacking in it.
Mhm.
Do you use that?
I don't. Yeah, I know you can, but I'll just do my single images, and I prefer to have the hands-on to control it at my end instead of letting the camera do it.
So, I don't want to bog things down. One, but what settings are you using?
So basically, what I'll use here is I'll go into Lightroom and I'll take those 12 images and I'll do some just basic, I'll fix my white balance because I have an astronaut camera, so it's gonna skew everything over to the magentas. So I'll do a white balance, I'll mess with my shadows and highlights. I might play around with the exposure, just very little bit. And then I'll take those images over to Sequator and stack them that way.
But you're not moving your camera when you do the stack. So,
No, I'm just taking the 12 images that I took.
but those images.
Yes,
Each one has a different setting, camera.
same setting. So basically what I did is
Focus point.
picture, 10 seconds, picture,
Same.
10 seconds go by, another picture, 10 seconds. So I'm just rapid firing on my
Well,
shutter.
you're not doing anything with them.
No, just this is the same image, just 12 times in rapid succession.
Oh,
You're
Yeah.
not changing anything, even the
Not-
focus point, you're
Not
not changing.
changing
not
anything at all. Yes, so when you're stacking, you just want to take images that are close together in time, so that
First
the
of
sky doesn't
whatever.
move too much. And then use the software it'll align based on, it'll randomly pick a base picture in which you can change. And then it'll add the other, in my case, I usually do a dozen. So I'll add the other 11 frames and it'll line them up. If you have foreground in your image, then there's a way you can paint that out so it ignores the foreground and it just looks at the stars. So it tightens your whole sky area up. So it helps remove noise in your image. Yes.
So I have a question. When you're with the mirrorless, I find it really hard to focus on something that's really dark.
Mhm.
How do you get it to focus, or what do you focus on?
That's coming.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. All right.
I had a question about some images you showed earlier
Yes.
that said the exposure time was 60 seconds.
Mhm.
And so it's like, how come I don't see any star trailing?
It was probably for the foreground portion or.
It actually said sky, so
Okay,
that's where.
so if it's a sky image, it's my track.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So. All right, I think that's all the questions for now. All right, so I should have put swap those two slides, but this was my final that I had here, stacking and blending. So in this image, I did 12 sky images. I did 3 foreground images, just my camera and my tripod was low in front of me. And I put it all together to create my sky with my foreground all in focus all the way to the south rim side. All right, tracked is, I just happen to have, I'm an astronomy person too, so I have a star tracker. A star tracker basically counteracts Earth's rotation and keeps your camera looking at the same plane in the sky. That allows you to lower your ISO, so your images are less noisy. You can go for longer exposures to get more detail and increase your signal to noise ratio. So a couple types here, if you're interested in that sort of thing, you have the Skywatcher, there's the Ioptron. These are kind of heavy if you like to travel and you want to try tracking. This is a little bit less expensive. It's called the Move Shoot Move Nomad, which I ended up getting. I've had the Skywatcher for 4 or 5 years, but the Nomad is something I got new end of last year. Really nice for if you're going to travel. But I'll show you what goes on with a tracked image. This was from Indian Cove just about a year ago. This image I just exposed and edited for my sky, and I did get a meteor nicely going through here. But if you look at the horizon, notice my horizon blurry because my camera this is a 2-minute exposure. So for 2 minutes, my camera, with the help of the tracker, is following as Earth spins and the skies looks like it's moving as a result. My camera stays pointed at that part of the sky, but at the same time, Earth looks like it's moving in my photos because I'm staying on my sky. So having the tracker is nice, but now I have this uneven jagged edge to deal with. So in this case, I'm going to need to take a foreground image to cover that. Yes.
Well, you just answered my question because I have a star tracker.
Okay.
And one of the things I noticed after I used it was the foreground was blurry because the star, like you said, if you
Yeah.
go ahead and take a picture to begin with of the foreground,
Right.
and then you start, and then you merge the two together later.
Yeah. Just the thing you have to remember to do, which sometimes I'm like, I let it go for like 2-3 minutes. Why is my foreground still blurry? Because you forgot to turn the tracker off. So always make sure when you do your foreground, the tracker is off. I've done that more times than I care to admit, but, all right, so here's my sky. And then those tracked images, like I mentioned, require a second exposure of the foreground. And you're going to, this is what I did, here's my foreground. And then I made a mask, removed my sky, and then I used that with previous image to create this. The problem is if your exposure is long, you're gonna get a big blur on your horizon line. And you go to put your foreground that is in focus on top of your sky layer, and you have mountains still underneath that are overlapping and such. So it requires a lot more energy on your part to edit the photo, but you get a nice result. The sky looks really good, I think, in a tracked image. So benefits, it's going to give you a longer exposure, so your signal to noise ratio is increased. So you can shoot at a lower ISO and reduce noise in your image. As a result, overall, we've lowered our noise, we've got a cleaner image, we've got a more detailed image. We capture fainer details. So this is going to give us more detail in the Milky Way, such as in these areas in the core, you'll see more detail on the darker areas. I really like tracking, and I sometimes will get lazy and don't track. So this year I've done more Milky Way tracking than I've shot, just set my camera up and go. Yes.
When you did the removal
Mhm.
of the scenery?
Yes.
Okay. Did you just do that with a Lightroom mask and take it out?
I actually went into Photoshop.
Okay,
I
let's
did,
say you
yeah.
don't have Photoshop, and so I don't believe, I know you can take it out with Lightroom, but I don't
Yeah.
believe there's any way with Lightroom to open up another photo and put back
No,
in.
No,
It's not
you have to be able to
possible.
layer it, but
So you're gonna have to use some other piece of software.
yeah, but GIMP is free.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I know GIMP will allow you to do layering.
does it run on Macs?
Yes.
Randall, do you know?
It does?
I've never done it, but I believe it does.
Uh-huh.
Pretty sure it does. Yeah, but I know that's another avenue that you could use, because I end up doing the photography bundle through Adobe, so I have Lightroom and
Yeah.
Photoshop. So, drawbacks, well, your foreground's gonna be blurred, like I mentioned, so you're gonna have to have a separate foreground image to blend with your track sky, and setup time is gonna be longer. So if what you want is in the sky right now, skip tracking, set your camera up real quick, get what you want. Here, we were waiting for it to get to dark, we found the spot that we kind of liked, we're picnic to the stars kind of theme here going on, the group, at Indian Cove Campground in Joshua Tree. So if you have time, a tracker's nice, but again, it depends on if you have a heavy one, can you transport it and such. So that's a downside, is it is gonna take you a little bit to set it up, you have to get polar aligned and such. Well, the last thing you can do is a composite, but if you do a composite, you need to tell people that this is a composite, because this is where you're taking your foreground and your sky, They might not be taken at the same place, at the same time. They could be on different days because you were there and this is how it was, and you were only there one night. But the next night you were over here and it was clear and you got a Milky Way that was beautiful. You know where the Milky Way was gonna be from that first night. So you use the Milky Way from the second night at a different location with your first night's foreground image that we took. But you need to tell people that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Why do you need to tell them?
Okay, because basically.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Bob, we're talking about the difference between real photos and fake
Yeah.
photos and all that. I want to know your philosophy.
My main reason for that is if it is a realistic, you can go there and shoot and it will look like that. You can say, yeah, it's a composite. I did take the shot, the Milky Way elsewhere, but it lines up to where it would be. I've seen people I did it once just because it was fun. I took a picture that I had taken at night at Mount Rushmore. The presidents actually look, where's the Milky Way? Well, I put the Milky Way behind them. So I didn't want to mislead someone and say, hey, cool picture, right? They go there thinking, I can get the Milky Way behind the presidents. No, you can't. The Milky Way is always behind them. They're looking at it. So from just that honesty standpoint, so people know, okay, I'm not going to be able to get that shot if I'm there. There's a cool wreckage of an old antique car out in Joshua Tree. Does not align with the Milky Way or the core anyway. So you need to say, okay, yeah, I took the Milky Way, I'm looking one way, but I thought this was a cool image, so this is my art. But
Isn't there?
it's nice to let people know so they don't think they can replicate that and then find out they can't.
Yeah, Facebook is full of those things.
Yeah.
People say, what I got, you know,
Yeah.
you go, no, you
Like, no, you didn't. Yeah, so that's my reasoning for it is if somebody looks at my work and they want to reproduce same location, which is fine if they like that, I want to let them know that, yeah, you can get that at the same location. Or at least I'll say this is representative because I was on site, the Milky Way, with my app showed it once right here. It's just, it was cloudy when I was there, and I'll just be truthful and tell them that in the description about my phone. Questions about?
So Photoshop's got this, as you mentioned earlier, this nifty AI program.
Yeah.
Where you can come in and change anything in that picture.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear you saying and I did that
Mhm.
in my stream with fall color
Yeah.
up in the Sierras, and I rebuilt it with AI, and oh my God, that was just better than I could have ever done.
Yeah, and it's just, I think just for me personally, if I did that, I would let people know that. Like, if, for example, if I do noise reduction, I'll use a program called, Topaz Labs Denoise. And I'll let people know I did that. I'm getting to the point when I'm doing my Milky Way photography, I will actually take the stars out of my image and take just the nebula part, and I'll do processing to really get a lot more detail. You're not gonna get an image like that out of a regular camera on spot. You're gonna need to do the processing for it. So I let people know if I post an image saying, okay, I took the stars out and I did a lot more processing of my Milky Way, so it's more vibrant and such. And then I put the stars back in because they're not the same color. So I like to let people know up front when I post stuff on Facebook or Instagram that I use some AI or something like that.
So I'm tempted to submit that super duper picture to competition.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
Yeah, you can ask you truthful and let them know.
Well, I'm wondering if they'll be able to tell.
Usually they can. I know there's algorithms supposedly working on that. There's gonna be data in your image, in your metadata, that lets them know. They can look at that metadata and say, yeah, this is not a legit,
And now, this guy didn't need any special tricks for his best of show awards in the past. I just want to point that out.
Yes.
A lot of competitions in the running will ask to see your original raw data,
I mean, for
and
land.
they're not gonna find.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true.
the-
Yeah, because I haven't done much. I've entered twice.
It's gonna be
in
hard to
things.
judge now.
And in fact, I never had it. I never got to that point where they said, hey, I want to see your original files, but I know.
mean, just
still-
to judge from
yeah,
nature.
That's a good point.
I'm still gonna do it.
Jessica, okay, but I. don't
So-
judge you.
Yeah,
She is skeptical.
Well, I was just gonna let you know, with our camera club, in competitions, you can't be using a bunch of AI,
It's a rule.
not allowed.
I respect you, thank you.
Don't edit your-
When you say you can't be using AI, like,
You
if
can
you're
use
shooting,
like
if
a
you're shooting,
removal or
You
something
can
like
use the
that, you
remove
get
tool.
yeah.
spots or something.
Denoise.
Or I should say,
ISO to remove noise or something, that's okay, right?
yeah,
That's-
Yeah,
Yeah.
denoise,
Yeah.
remove
Yeah, that's,
tool.
that's a tool. It's not
Uh-huh.
using an AI.
I see.
Not generating anything.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly,
Photo.
yeah.
Mhm.
I just want to be cognizant of our time, so let me go ahead and just kind of wrap up with our last type, again, being a composite. This was at Cyclop Arch, again, in Alabama Hills. And I did a Milky Way first because we had somebody on site, he got there first. So we're waiting for him to do his stuff because he didn't want to play nice and let us photograph when he was doing it. Because he was lighting everything up, as you can see.
Oh,
from
he
the
owned the
light
sky.
off here.
Yeah.
So I went ahead, set up my camera, didn't trap, just took my 12 shots. And I got, this is my Milky Way stack. And then we had scouted during the day, so I knew this is where I wanted to stand. We had a little light, warm light. Pull that off. Randall actually went and put that inside the skull cyclops there. And I combined these two. So to get the skull part, this was my shot of just the foreground, then the illuminated part, and then edited them to put them together. Then I removed the sky. And with my app, I knew, okay, Milky Way was about here. If the bozo had gotten out of the way because he thought he was done. And then he stayed around. And my shooting partner and I were like, I'm gonna kill him. It's like, he said he was done and he kept flashing the lights, so whatever. So it was technically a composite because there was a good half hour plus between when I took my foreground, which was in a different location, and when I did my sky previous to that. So my final image turned out to be this. Now that's pretty much where the Milky Way would have been, because I checked it with my app, but it is technically a composite because they were shot in two different locations, be it, I don't know, 30, 50 feet, but it is a composite.
I'd still buy it.
But I did say that. So when you're creating your image, we got in the question about focusing, and exposure and composition. So just real quickly, when you're focusing, you want to set your exposure as bright as possible. So you want your lens wide open, jacked up your ISO a bit. You want to find a bright star. What's helpful is to turn your focus to infinity for starters. So you're going to be in the ballpark. And then you take your camera on your ball head, your eared head, whatever. Point your camera towards a bright star. Put the star in the middle of your frame because that's where your lens is going to be at that sweet spot for focus. And then you very lightly take your focus ring and rack it back and forth until you start seeing a pinpoint of light. At that point, when I start seeing a little bit of light, then I shoot primarily in prime lenses. So I'll go to my camera, the magnification button, and I'll go to, whatever allows me, 10x or whatever. And that star again is in the middle of my frame. So then I'm focusing and I'm again racking very slowly to get in and focus. What you don't want to do is you've got the star in the center of your frame, and then you have a zoom lens. Oh, I'm just gonna zoom in. It's like, yeah, but now it's not gonna be a focus when you're at 11 millimeters for your overall shot. So make sure it's the camera's magnification of the screen. So you zoom in and keeping that star or it could be a planet, maybe Jupiter's out at time and you use that. But use the live view on your camera to see it, to magnify it, and to help with that, you can get, it's pretty cheap on Amazon, a Carson Lumi Loop, which literally is, and I should have brought it, but you take it and put it on your back of your screen and it'll magnify it another 10x. And then you're literally count the pixels of how big your star is to get the tightest focus. Now, me personally, once I'm there, I just don't touch my lens and I go. Some people will take like gaffer's tape and set it to keep the focus where it is. I worry about I'll rock the focus as I add the tape to hold it in place. So for me personally, I'll just get it the focus where I want it, and I just make sure I don't touch my lens from there on out. So that's basically how I go through focus. Get it towards infinity first, so you're kind of close, and then put something bright, a star, a planet, something that's in the sky, in the center of your frame, in the sweet spot, and then go back to your composition to take your shots.
How do you get into infinity focus?
Well, it's just basically, you have two, when you're taking your focus, if you look on the display, often on the lens, it'll have an infinity, and you'll have either a line or something that'll line up with the infinity, the double loop. Little thing.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. So that's
Old camera marking, yeah.
And even though that you're thinking, okay, my sky will be in focus, it isn't always, because it also affects the temperature of the atmosphere around you. All right, so take a high ISO test. So in this example, it didn't matter. Randall was over behind me. Ask to show your red light. See what it did to my picture? It didn't matter because it's just a test frame. But if I'd been in the middle of an exposure for my foreground, he would have gotten the evil eye. But I'm at 51,200 and I'm wide open, and 3 to 5 seconds enough. And I look, ooh, a lot of these stars. Check it again. Okay. Then 13 seconds of exposure. I'm down to my normal settings, f2 with my 20 millimeter lens, ISO 6400, and I zoom in on my LCD screen. Once the image playback comes up, my stars look pretty tight. I'm happy. I'm ready to start shooting. So don't take, especially if you're like a Nikon D7500, those exposures can be like 25, 30 seconds. Don't waste 30 seconds when you can take a 3 or 5 second image to check your focus. So it's always a good idea to do a high ISO test, check your focus first, then remember to change it back down to your normal settings too. All right, then exposure. Again, we talked a little bit about that at the beginning, settings you want to use, but you're looking at your shutter speed. You want your shutter speed to have pinpoint stars, unless you're doing star trails, and then you want them to trail. So try different exposures. Does 8 seconds work? Does 10 seconds work? Does 13? Does 15? Does 20, 30? Okay. So what works with your gear? Your aperture, that will help with how sharp your stars are. It depends on the quality of your lens. But if you notice things aren't looking really good, it's not real sharp, try notching your aperture back a little bit. If you have an f.2, 2.8, knock it back a little bit, and maybe your stars will be a little sharper. Your ISO, you don't want it too high because then you're introducing a little bit more noise for some cameras. Some are ISO invariant. You don't have to worry about that as much. But again, I typically use 3,200 to 6,400 for my ISO. And again, remember, LCD screen lies. Check the histogram. Watch where your data for the Milky Way, the sky, is falling off. Should be in kind of the midsection of your LCD, of your histogram. Yeah.
I just wanted to say something about noise that I learned the hard way doing this.
Yeah.
And that's that I was out in Borrego Springs and it was nighttime and it was like 98 degrees. And when the camera gets hot,
Yeah.
the noise goes way up and the images are pretty much unusable.
Right. So
Yeah,
that's
so
that in
be careful
particular.
what temperature you're
Is that
shooting.
with all cameras?
Yeah.
Especially if
Yeah.
you're trying to do
Okay.
Yes,
trails.
the longer,
star trails.
yeah, the longer, that's the thing about tracking. If you're doing a long exposure, like I have a friend that will do like a 5 or 10 minute track exposure. And I'm like, Felicia, why are you doing that? Take a 2 minute, take 5 of them, stack them, you have less noise. If you're doing a foreground, like Jim said, you're doing a foreground, I want to do a nice low ISO, big depth of field, so I'm shooting like f5.6, f8, f11 even maybe. So it's a, I'm doing 6, 10, 12 minutes. Okay, that's going to be really noisy. That's where you're going to want to do a dark frame to help subtract all that extra noise from your sensor being hot.
So you know how you have that heating
Mhm.
thing? Is there a cooling one? I mean,
Not so much, because that's more just to keep your lens from getting condensation on it if you get close to the dew point, which I only end up using once or twice a year when we have weather it's like that. Here in California, it's pretty nice.
We close?
Yeah. So that's basically it. And then as composition goes, as photographers, you guys know what makes a good composition in your Milky Way photography. So I'll just jump through so you see a couple pretty pictures, but leading lines, symmetry, in practice just makes perfect. Keep challenging yourself in ways to bring about your vision for your night sky. And like you did for your focus, take a short ISO image to check your composition. Is there something there that's in the way? There's a sign. Oh, if I step over here, there's my composition. That sign's out of the way. So make sure to pay attention to your composition as well as what your sky is doing. And I think that's pretty much, I can stop here, but there's lots of examples on the internet. I showed you the picture of Little Hunter's Beach that I took. It was inspired by this one here. Okay, and the one here with Devil's Tower. So that was my Little Hunter's Beach picture, and it was based on somebody that had taken the picture the month before. And then there's my Devil's Tower picture based on Mary Beth's picture she had taken the year before. So feel free to duplicate what other people do. It's your art, how you develop it, how you do the processing, it's up to you. So, and I can go ahead and just leave it there.
Perfect.